thank you, my previous colleagues, because it actually laid down a lot of what I will be talking about here today with you. And thank you for being here despite of my huge title. And the huge title is on purpose. Let me go back there. This huge title. And why it is on purpose? I do like huge titles. I think they usually tell you what you should expect. And what you should expect is a big part of what all the best practice or standards we'll be talking about. And communication is key. It's all about communication, everything I will be talking to you. A clear, concise, respectful communication is what will bring this best standards or best practice to a project. Just so you know who you're talking with, Paloma. As you can hear, I'm quite of a cat fan. I have a very unique history with open source. I started more than a decade ago supporting communities, supporting open source software and hardware through makerspaces, doing art, creative coding. I went through synthetic biology, through open medicine, patents. But now, when I started in SOS Labs, I start to understand open source through the maintenance and through the governance side. And this is what sparkled this talk. I learned from amazing people, Chris Hiller, Christian Broman, and Diego Molina. They have been teaching me a lot about what it means to be a maintainer and what it means to keep the project and community going. This is what we will be talking about today. What is open source, what's the problems, and how to be the change we wanted to have. This is a little mind map. I will be sharing the slides with those topics and tons of references, so leave a link at the end. But this is like the big mind map of what I will try to bring to you in these 10 minutes. And in the part one, let's first start understanding what it is open source. And I cannot say enough how much important it is to bring that and to ask this question over and over again. Because it's not one thing or one verb. And I think many people can have several perspectives. It all started in the beginning of the 80s to legally guarantee the possibility to share, distribute. But nowadays, we know it is way much more than that. It goes from political actions to a billion-dollar industry. So my favorite definition of open source is that it is an ecosystem. Because just like Justin just said, it is way much more than code. The code and the technical part is just a small part of it. It is a huge ecosystem that is, yes, of course, we have the code, we have the people, sometimes not even the code, to be honest, in some project. But it is by design a project that is open to other. And who is this other? Is this other to foster this culture of sharing? And this is what this ecosystem it is about. We are talking about open source, right? Isn't it open? And the question is, open to whom? And this is how we get into the part two. The part two is that it is beautiful. Open source, without the open source, actually, the whole industry really would depend on our jobs, and all of what we're talking here would have just collapsed. It would not even exist. This is the huge and size of the importance of the open source. Without it, we would not exist. I think it's very important to make that clear. And it's quite beautiful when you say we're standing in the shoulders of giants. If you stand long enough in open source, you will probably hear that several times. We benefit from this power of this common, of these people doing together. And we're using this collective labor and intelligence to make something better, supposed to be to everyone. But what we rarely speak is that it's usually dependent on the solely volunteer work of the maintainers. And that creates a huge imbalance, both for the work perspective, but also for the diversity perspective. And why is that? Simply because while open source could be a really important way, interesting way to foster diversity in the development industry, valuing the contribution, not of who is contributing, that is not actually true. Why? Because it can become an even bigger barrier for women and underprivileged people. This is historical and systemic. Underprivileged people and women, they often carry a disproportionate social burden and work, unpaid and invisible work. So this idea that the code would be valued and comes from meritocracy, that it does not exist. It would only exist if this world we live in would be actual, fair, and equal. And we do not. So let's think about it. Let's understand that open source is this billion-dollar industry that is shaping the technological development, that is affecting people's life. It is tangible because we depend on technology so much nowadays, and it's composed by a very homogeneous environment. Latest research, and I can also provide a link, shows that less than 5% compose a diversity, meaning not white men. How can such a few representation of our society making the decision to where this industry is going? So to bring the change, it's imperative to be intentional. But how? How can I be intentional? What can I do?
What is that? What is that?
Building structures with transparency of communication and governance.
What is that?
Where you can bring a clear, concise, and respectful communication to make your project more accessible to others. This is the key of everything that I'm speaking here. But how, right? Let's share this type of communication that you can bring to your project in 3 parts. The procedural, the processes, the daily, what you do on day by day. A lot of Brian was talking about how to get a PR and how the things are done, and the long term. Let's break it down. What do I mean by procedural? I mean by having one single issue tracker that is public and transparent, that you have mechanisms to discuss these changes, that you have meet space that it's scheduled and open for people to participate. They can bring their voice. Some documents you can add on your project, like a clear README and the code of conduct that will guide the expectations from what you can expect from this community, and having this ownership, which is who owns the project and what's going to be done. On the daily basis, there's other things to do, just like how's the status of your project, the concepts and how you do things, how to submit, how to propose enhancements, how to contribute. And there's several semantic versions, change log and securities and all sorts of documents you can add to reinforce how to do that thing and make the communication as clear as possible. And the long term, that means how is your roadmap available for everyone? Which licenses you're using, meaning that legally someone that is coming can mix and match licenses, and how will they be able long term to use and not only contribute but reuse the project? What are the concepts? All that is about how you're thinking in the process on daily and in long term. A test director where you avoid regression. And because my time is ending, what is the conclusion of all that? Well, we do have a huge imbalance in our community, in our scene. And there was, but standards, I truly believe, conclusion. Creating and maintaining an open source project is very rewarding, and working collaboratively is an incredible experience. But we do know that we do have an issue in this homogeneous environment, and working openly and collaboratively, it is very challenging. By assuring the standards, which I recently watching the FOSS backstage was reinforced by other talks, like adding priorities of consumptions. My watch. Everyone can truly benefit from what you're bringing. This is the power of the standards. And there's a lot of references for you to go further, but for now,